Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, I make videos on photography, videography, and the occasional vlog. Today, I'm talking about whether you need a quote-unquote real camera. Something like this, or if you're good enough with just your phone. My guess is, for most of you watching, those of you who don't have a real camera, is the answer is probably no. But I want to share 7 reasons why I use something like this, as well as then a few times where I will pull out my phone. Let's get into it. Point number 1 is low light capability. The smartphones, just in general, don't have a great ability to capture photos at night. And that is mainly because of the sensor that is inside the phone or then the dedicated camera. In a phone, the sensor is tiny. In a DSLR or mirrorless camera, it's massive, and that makes the difference in terms of letting in enough light to capture your scene. Now, I'm not going to throw 2 images on screen and make you guess which was shot on a phone versus a dedicated camera, because the point of this video is just to share the 7 reasons why I use a dedicated camera, not to make you guess which one looks better, because depending on how you do the test, you can make a phone look great, or you can make it look trash. Point number 2 would be zoom functionality. Some cameras nowadays have multiple lenses, and so you have a telephoto lens that allows you to get slightly more zoomed in, which is great, but anytime you want to zoom in past that, now you're digitally zooming your image, and it's creating all sorts of artifacts and grain, and it's not looking good compared to on a DSLR, you have optical glass elements that are moving that are creating an actual zoom. You can see from this comparison that it makes a huge difference in terms of what you can see resolution and image quality wise. Point number 3 would be actual depth of field. This is comparing the lenses that you can put on a DSLR or mirrorless camera to the portrait mode that is now on so many smartphones. Now, don't get me wrong, portrait mode has come a long way and it's amazing, and for a lot of you, you probably have 0 problems with it. But for my use cases, there are times where portrait mode can act quirky or it doesn't know what to do with an edge and it won't blur something properly. And so for that case, that's why I want to use a dedicated camera. I was out with my friend Sabrina and we took a photo in portrait mode over in Schaumburg area, and we can see in this photo that it did blur the background, but it didn't blur the foreground. And when you shoot with a dedicated camera, when you're racking focus, you're controlling what plane of focus you want the camera to focus at. So here we can see that the stick is actually in focus here, but then if we rack focus to the middle, now the stick is out of focus, and if we rack focus to the background, we can see now both Sabrina and the stick are out of focus. This is what should actually happen, and having the ability to choose what plane of focus I want is critical for the things that I do, and I don't want to have software trying to blur or detect an edge. Point number 4 would be autofocus. On a dedicated camera, you have the ability to control your autofocus points way more than you do on a smartphone. On a smartphone, they do sometimes now have a face tracking mode, which is great, but it only works some of the time. Whereas on the DSLRs, you have the ability to choose a given focus point and only focus on that one section, which is huge. As well as on some of the new mirrorless cameras, you now have the ability to do face tracking and eye detection autofocus, and that completely blows a smartphone out of the water. The fact that it will just track the eye and keep it in focus all the time is amazing. Point number 4 would be frames per second, in terms of how many photos you can take in a second. And now this kind of compounds off of the previous tips. So yes, a lot of smartphones have a burst mode, and it works great if you're trying to take just a wide photo. But as soon as you want to zoom in and have a burst of photos, that's where then you're going to run into a problem of it's now digitally crappy and you don't get the same control. So with these cameras, you can shoot really fast, sometimes 5, 10, 15, 20 frames a second, depending on which camera you have. And so for sports, to have the zoom and the high quality image and the burst rate, that's where, of course, you're going to get a dedicated camera. point number 6 would be having full manual control over the settings. Yes, on a smartphone you can download some apps that supposedly allow you to change these settings, like shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. From my experience, they don't really work well, and it seems like they're simulating stuff, not actually changing things. Whereas on a DSLR, you can change a million different things. In my experience, the 3 main settings, all you need to know is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. If you can understand those 3, then you can start taking great photos. I'm going to make a separate video on this topic later, so I'll go ahead and throw up in the card the link to that now if you're wanting to learn the exposure triangle, or how to balance those 3 settings. And finally, point number 7 would be more ability to edit your images in post. When you're shooting on a smartphone, normally you capture JPEG images, that's the file type, whereas on a dedicated DSLR or mirrorless camera, you can shoot in RAW, which is an uncompressed file type. Now, some phones, yes, they do have RAW features now, which is amazing. The main advantages are that you can change the white balance or the blueness or yellowness of your photo completely in post. Whereas if you take a photo on your phone or in a JPEG format, now you don't have as much leeway to edit your photo. So in terms of getting the image to look the way you want, always shoot RAW. There's 0 reasons why you wouldn't. I mean, okay, sure, it takes up more file space, but it's so cheap nowadays, you can get like a terabyte for 50 bucks. So having the ability to shoot RAW, massive. So yeah, those are my main 7 points that I choose to use a dedicated camera for. But to be fair, there also are reasons why I would use a smartphone. The number 1 thing by far is time, convenience. When you take a photo with your phone, it's instant. You just post it right away. Whereas with a DSLR or mirrorless, you either have to put your SD card into a computer, save the images, and then download them to your phone and then post them. So that's a huge thing for people to just be able to snap, post, done. The second thing kind of builds off of what I talked about there. For a dedicated camera, you have a lot of different components of it that you need to have. You need to have, obviously, the camera body. You need the specific lens that you want. Sometimes you need to change the lens if it doesn't work. Then you need the SD card itself to record images on. And you got to make sure you have a battery and that it's fully charged. It can be very easy to be missing one thing or wishing you had a different lens. So it is something to keep in mind. You got to have all the stuff required to go take photos. And then the final advantage of using a phone is that this is not intimidating at all. Whereas when you show up with something like this, people are like, oh, whoa, what are you doing? That's professional. And so in some cases that's great because that's how you get jobs and stuff like that. But I was with my friend Dan Gribb the other day. We were at a mall and we were actually asked by security what we were doing with cameras, and you're supposed to have permission, and people can just get freaked out by having something like this. So if you're just trying to capture a candid moment or you don't want people to be a little bit shook, sometimes the phone is the way to go. You can record things, capture things that you wouldn't be able to because you'll get kicked out or you're not allowed to enter if you have something like that. But that sums it up. For my use cases, the dedicated DSLR or mirrorless camera is by far the clear winner for those 7 main reasons. I can get around the 3 inconveniences that the smartphone wins at, and so for my case, yes, the dedicated camera is what I'm going with. But for you guys taking a wide angle photo or doing a portrait mode effect, that might work perfectly for you, and that's amazing. The point of this video is just to share the reasons why I use a dedicated camera and why you may want to consider getting one if one of those 7 reasons is holding you back in some way. I'm going to be releasing some more videos on absolute beginner stuff to photography, so if you do choose to pick up a camera, I'll have a bunch of tutorials and things going. I'll link a playlist at the end of this where you can see all of those videos so that I can catch you guys up to speed to help taking some really awesome and cool photos or videos. That's going to wrap up this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, hit the bell, and I will see you guys real soon. Peace.